Welcome to Conversation with Priya. I'm your host, Priya Mishra. Today, our guest is Bron Williams. She is known as a bias specialist. She is engaged in developing bespoke program and delivering a strategic using various tools such as digital presentation, workshop, and conferences, and not creating an awareness on the already existing concept of bias in corporate world. Bron gives her leadership in the question they need to ask so they can acknowledge, identify, and address the bias that hurt them, their staffs, and businesses that keep them stuck and impact performance. She believes it is then that leaders have the strength and optimism for future growth. She has authored 2 books titled I Have Seen the Moon and Powered by Your Past. Both the books are reflective of her learnings from working and the asylum seeker on the Pacific island of Nauru and experience of her past. As of her personal details, she is a family of 3 sons and 2 daughters in the laws and 6 grandchildren. She lives in Melbourne and Victoria. So help me to welcome our guest, Bron Williams. Hello, Bron. Thank you for joining in today. Welcome to my show, Conversation with Priya. I would like to ask your journey today before we go into further questions.
Okay, my journey. Well, let's start with my hair. You can see by the colour of my hair that I've been around the planet, around the sun for quite a few decades. So, I have a family, I have grandchildren. So that's a wonderful aspect of my life. In a past life, I was a teacher, so was in the education sphere for many, many years. And in my 50s, I joined the Salvation Army and trained as a Salvation Army officer, became a minister of religion. And it was while I was working with the Salvation Army in Canberra that the Australian federal government reopened the offshore processing centre for asylum seekers on Nauru and Banners Island. And the Salvation Army was asked to provide the welfare services to the asylum seekers. So an email went round to all staff and officers asking for volunteers to go for 4 weeks. Now, I put my hand up, not because I had a burning desire to work with refugees or to work in the tropics, because Nauru is 35 kilometres south of the equator, but really because I couldn't think of any reason why not to.
Yeah.
And it's so often these little serendipitous sorts of decisions that we make that go on to have literally life-changing consequences. So I jumped on the plane in Brisbane in the middle of the night. We rock up into Nauru, into the really bright tropical sunlight. You know, it's bouncing off the tarmac. It's 80% humidity. And I'm thinking, what have I got myself in for? I'm here for 4 weeks.
Yeah.
We had a full day's orientation, and the last thing we had to do was to go down into the camp. Now, this was green army tents, mesh fence, security guards. So it was a camp. And as I'm walking around with my group, just sort of being oriented to where we were going to work, I was getting this sort of visceral feeling in my gut, a bit of a churning, and I didn't understand why. Right. But as I reflected on it over the next couple of weeks, I realised that was actually a fear reaction, that I was afraid. And it wasn't because these men would actually hurt me.
Yeah.
They were asylum seekers. They had suffered huge trauma. But it was just purely because they was different. Like, I'd grown up in a white, monocultural, Bible Belt area of Sydney.
Yeah.
Hadn't mixed with many people that were other than white. And here were these men who were from Sri Lanka, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iran and Iraq, so very different countries, all speaking languages that I didn't understand because, hello, I only speak English. And, different skin colour, and most of them were Muslim, and I'd been brought up in the Christian tradition. So they were just different. And I realised, took me a while, and it was quite confronting to realise that the woman who wouldn't have said she had a racist bone in her body actually had a latent racism purely from growing up in this very monocultural area and not being exposed. So I had this sense the difference was a threat to me. That was quite confronting.
Yeah. So you started, and that's where your journey started towards your, inclusion of bias. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. Look, I don't think I even knew the word bias. So that was 2012. I asked for a permanent appointment on Nauru.
Yeah.
From the Salvation Army, and went back in 2013 for 8 months as the religious liaison officer. So
right.
I was responsible for the religious needs of
yeah.
all the asylum seekers. By that stage, there were men, women and children on the island. And as I was working with the Nauruans who were on our team and just observing how us whiteys were reacting to the Nauruans, I realised we all, including myself, had this sense of superiority. It was like, well, hello, first world country, university educated, therefore we know better. And one day I sat down with Fatima, who headed up the Nauruan team for the Salvation Army, and talked to her about that. Now, her words just floored me, because she said, oh, we know that about you guys, but we just accept it. It was like a body blow. I'm thinking, oh, we really are that, we really are that bad. And when I went home, I started to explore what all this meant and came across the concept of white privilege and of bias. And so I actually had to own the fact that I have white privilege. I didn't ask for it. It's just part of me growing up as a white person, but that I'm also racist. And again, I didn't intend to be, didn't mean to be, but it's part of my outlook just from how I was raised, even though my parents were really very kind, nice people, but just there's all these unconscious influences. So that was really, for me, the personal experiences that started me on this road.
Yeah, and that right. So there are not many people are working in that space and owning that fact, which you are right now. In bias is an issue that is unfortunately common in the workplace of today. What inspired you to focus on this area of specialty? What needs to be done to tackle and eradicate bias?
Yeah. So what inspired me was literally my own experiences, because that changed my life.
Yeah.
Because I started to see that, gosh, look, I'm just an ordinary Aussie girl from the Sutherland Shire in Sydney. I've lived in Canberra. I now live in Melbourne. But, I'm just an ordinary Aussie girl. And I thought there's got to be a lot of other people out there who are like me, who are experiencing these things.
Yeah.
And I knew I needed to change. And I've always been a sort of person who's a purpose-driven person, and I'm thinking, I want this to be better. Because I've come to realise that bias lies at the heart of all injustice and inequality. Yeah. And because those things are passionate for me, it's part of why I was in the Salvation Army, then this is a personal issue. But it's one that I want to help other people.
Yeah, yeah.
And I've gone into the corporate space purely because corporates in many ways run the world. They have huge influence in so many areas of our life. And if I can help the leaders, so boards, executive teams, to understand about their own bias at a personal level, but also about the bias that exists within their companies that's actually damaging both their reputations, their staff, their leadership, and also the bottom line, if I can help them see that, then I will do my small part to making a world a better place.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's not about being white or any other color. It's being about how you perceive the people who you are meeting. How you're going to actually create a perception and how you're going to be more inclusive towards whole human race,
Oh, I completely agree. My partner is a very conservative, traditional white Aussie male.
Yeah.
And so he often struggles. He will say something, because he works with Indians and Sri Lankans in his workplace. And he'll say, is this racist? And then he just talks about them being an Indian or about something about their culture. And I say, no, it's not being racist to notice the differences. Like, hello, I can see that your skin colour is different to mine. It's not racist to notice the difference. Your cultural background is different to mine. That's not racist.
Yeah.
It's when we attribute a moral value. If I say all Indians are and then add something negative, that's being racist. Yeah. Or if I won't get to know you or talk to you because I distrust you because you've got a different skin colour, that's being racist.
Yeah.
That's the difference. Hello, I've worn glasses all my life. I got bullied as a kid because I wear glasses. But, I'm still a person, but I was different. So it's when we use those differences to put other people down, to hurt other people, that's when we've got bias. That's when our bias is having a negative impact.
Yeah, generalizing, creating that, stereotype mindset.
Absolutely.
A lot of time. I've been like a lot of time I meet people. I should not mention that, but when I met initially, they said, "Oh, isn't it Indians are like darker skin?" I'm like, India, have you seen India? Like you go every part of the India, you will get every shape and size and a color of Indians.
That's right.
So, there are people who are 7 feet tall and there are people who are 4 feet tall as well. So, you can't generalize that.
Well, I've got a great friend who was born and raised in Sri Lanka, and I worked with an Australian man of Sri Lankan heritage when I was on Nauru. Now, Tara has skin very similar to yours, probably a little bit lighter. Patrick is as black as black as black. It's just like, and they're both from the same little island. You go, how does that happen? So skin colour is just what it is.
It's a matter of how you exposed, how your genetics are and all. There are so many other factors, scientific factors involved.
Absolutely. Over which you have no control.
No control. So, but generalizing by the community, it's okay to have a generic understanding how overall culture works. And that's also define your overall culture of your upbringing in the corporate as well, like you creating a company culture. But that's all good. There is a family culture, there is a company culture, there is a whole country culture, but then you can't have that stereotype mindset, people individually will be much better world.
Oh, very much so. And I certainly, out of my work on Nauru, I've got to know some of the asylum seekers who are now living in Melbourne and starting to understand aspects of their faith.
Yeah.
Why they think the way they do. And for some of them who were Muslim only because they grew up in a Muslim country, once they're in Australia, they've left that faith basis behind because it actually has no value for them as an individual, and they've got the freedom to make that choice now. It is about...
there are a lot of people are turning towards atheists, like they don't want to be known as a religion, like from identified by a religious belief, right? So it's younger generation is changing a lot if you look at that way, so it's a different world altogether. You have had quite an experience in working with asylum seeker in Nauru. Do you think that modern day migration makes any senses, or is it something that government needs to stop by creating better facilities at home?
Well, I think actually asylum seekers and migrants are two different people. Because migrants make the choice to leave, they pack up their home, they apply for a visa, they get on an aeroplane generally, and they move to another country to intentionally make a new home. Asylum seekers are generally forced out of their home country because of unrest, persecution, famine, those sorts of things where it becomes untenable for them to live in their home. And, we've only have to look at what has happened with Syrian refugees that have, moved across to Europe.
Yeah.
And just the level of the movement of asylum seekers and refugees in the Middle East. It's huge, and also in Africa. And then we, of course, have experienced it here in Australia with people coming by boat.
Yeah.
Which, our governments have done different things to address. So it's a huge problem.
Yeah.
Asylum seekers will only be feel safe to stay. People will only feel safe to stay in their countries when their countries are stable.
Yeah.
Now, there's so much interplay between the West and the East and the Middle East. You know, here in Australia, we have an untroubled society, but when we send our troops to the Middle East to involve ourselves in one way or another in the conflicts there, we are contributing to the asylum seeker issues, the refugee issues. And so we've got to take some responsibility there. So it's, like Australians aren't living Australia because we're, it's a terrible place to live. We might choose to go and live somewhere else in the world because we want to do that. So, yes, stability at home is good. But while ever there are conflicts, famines, poverty, and some of that has to do with how governments manage their countries.
Yeah.
Until those things are addressed, I think we're going to continue to see the movement of displaced people.
Yeah, for sure. So, that brings to, like, after that, your Nauru work, you actually you started working more towards the leadership and the corporate. What's in your word describes good leadership? Do you see firm and decisive leaders as the driving force for corporate success?
Okay. I do believe that leaders need to have vision, clarity of vision. They need to be able to make good decisions. They also need to be able to delegate responsibilities and trust the teams that they delegate that responsibility to. However, I think leadership comes in a variety of different forms. Again, to a certain extent, this does come back to where bias comes into play, because by and large, for millennia, men have been the leaders in business because that was just the way it is. And now women have been moving into business. Now, I believe men and women lead differently because our outlooks are different.
Yeah.
And it's not better or worse, it's just different. So I think as we start to understand that people lead differently, but also that some men have a different leadership style to other men. Some men are quite firm and decisive. Other men are more collaborative. Women, by and large, are more collaborative. So, I think the key for leadership is a couple of things. One is openness. Leaders need to be open to change in themselves and change in the corporations that they need.
Yeah.
And they need to be open to growth.
Yeah.
Both personally and corporately. So I think if there's an openness in a leader, it doesn't actually matter what their style is.
Yeah.
They will be able to lead well because they're learning.
Mm-hmm. So that coming women into the leadership is actually changing the percentage for sure. But I believe it's still miles to go on that sense, like inclusion of the women and feminine leaders in the workforce is still not as a percentage are not as high as it should be. What do you think about it? How we can improve in that area? And do you think talking about this feminine thing is also creating a kind of a challenge for the men leaders and the inclusion by the men party in the workplace? Is there any scarcity or a conscious behavioral problem is happening between the two genders?
Great question. I liken the corporate space to a sandpit or a sandbox, that men have been playing in the sandbox for millennia. They made up the rules of play, and as men move into the sandbox, they sort of somehow instinctively pick up the rules because they fit how they think. Now, women have been playing in the sandbox now for about less than 100 years. And we've been asked to play by the rules that have been set. And on the whole, I think we've tried to do that. But women are starting to realise that actually their way of leading or their way of deciding or their way of working is valid. And so they're starting to make this move now to say, look, how about we look at things from this perspective?
Yeah.
Therein lies a challenge. There's two challenges. One, there is certainly a challenge for men who can feel threatened by people who think differently to themselves. That said, there are so many good, strong male leaders who are open to new ways of looking at things, and so they are welcoming women in leadership. Women too, I think, are growing in confidence in their own leadership styles, in their own way of making decisions, realising that we don't actually have to play by the same rules. We don't have to be men in women's clothes, or we don't have to act the way a man does to be able to succeed in this space.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to move. It's important that we continue to move towards parity, because everybody benefits when there is a balance.
For sure. I totally agree that, unless there is a multiple perspective, there is a less chance of growth,
Yes.
So obviously it's again the innovation of the leadership, because of the different brains and different kind of people are coming. Stop thinking about male or female. Start thinking like different individuals have the different perspective, and they brings different things on the table, and that's how we can grow, I believe.
Yes, indeed.
So you have been in a creative communication professional for several years now. What have been the key takeaway for your career, or what have been the significant learning over the years?
I love that, because my 3 core values are courage, creativity and connection. So that's what I'm about as a human being. And I do combine all of those in my work. In terms of communication, one of the things that I've learned in moving from a teaching space, which is didactic, pedantic sometimes, the imparting of knowledge, to where I am now more in the consulting and speaking space.
Yeah.
Where a teacher teaches, what I'm about is helping people to learn. And that was a shift that I needed to make. So that's probably the most important thing that I have learnt myself, is that I need, while I may have knowledge that I want to impart and I want to do that well and communicate it, there is no real communication unless the other person has heard me.
For sure.
Yeah, and so that for me, and I think in terms of leadership as well, when we're as leaders making decisions that we want to communicate, we need to be able to do it in the way that other people can hear.
Yeah.
So whether that's on our team or down through the ranks of staff and employees, because people will not follow you as a leader if they don't understand what it is that you're leading them to.
Yeah.
Okay?
Okay.
It's important.
Yeah. Very nice. So thank you so much for your conversation today. If you have to suggest your leaders for 2 cents today, what would be your 2 cents today to the leadership to take away?
Okay. All right. My big one, when addressing bias or being aware of bias, the best way to mitigate it is to ask the next question. And by that I mean, when you have to make a decision and you think you've got there, just ask, who does this decision hurt? Who does this decision overlook? Because then you have the capacity to have a different perspective come into it. So, ask the next question.
Yeah, thank you. So thank you for joining in today. It was nice talking to you. I'm pretty sure there are a lot of things we have discussed which will be value add to the leadership and the accommodating to the different cultures. And it's all about how you build your company culture. So it was nice talking to you and looking forward to hearing you again. Thank you so much for today.
Great. Thanks, Priya.